And now, it's an honor to kick off our program this morning. I'm extremely grateful that we have three major leaders in our community here today who will share with us a wealth of knowledge about Juneteenth, the holiday that commemorates the abolition of slavery in the U.S. So at this time, I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Judge David Mason. Judge Mason is a 1983 graduate of Washington University School of Law in St. Louis and a 1980 graduate of Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. He was appointed circuit judge in August of 1991 at the age of 35 and presides over major civil and criminal trials. Judge Mason was elected to the American Law Institute in 1996 and served from 1996 to 2001 as a member of the National Board of Directors of the American Judicature Society. He has also served for over 30 years as an adjunct professor of law at WashU. Today, Judge Mason is here to share his insight on the importance of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Take it away, Judge Mason.
Okay, I'm responsible for asking all of you to come down because it's the teacher in me. And whenever I would see a bunch of students and everybody sitting in the back, I'd make everybody come up front. So you can blame me for that request, and I appreciate those of you who honored that request. Let's thank the History Museum not only for this presentation, but for their efforts in making sure that a lot of unknown history comes to the forefront for everybody to hear about and learn about. So thank you very much. Lindsay, and could you please thank your staff? The whole interest in Juneteenth, particularly here in our region, was tied to two significant events. First off, as you know, a year ago, we celebrated here in the United States, actually 2 years ago, we celebrated here in the United States the first national Juneteenth holiday. And as a nation, we've been sort of like a moving train, just slowly moving up to realize and understand the significance of Juneteenth to all of our history. But let me start out by simply saying this. July the 4th created a nation. Juneteenth created a national culture and economy. That's how impactful the elimination of slavery was to the development and growth of this nation. Juneteenth is essentially the celebration of this nation saving itself from destruction as a result of the Civil War. So let's go into a bit of the history of it. I mentioned there were two events that kind of triggered our local interest in Juneteenth. The other event I'm very proud to have been the founder of. You've heard of the Freedom Suits Memorial downtown. Well, in the development of that memorial, I and others, we spent 7 years educating the community on the untold story of the Freedom Suits here in St. Louis. And in fact, this museum had an excellent program and an excellent presentation that they had for almost a year on the Freedom Suits here in St. Louis. And why do I mention that? Because when those Freedom Suits became the center of attention in St. Louis, lo and behold, it becomes the center of attention of historians nationwide. And in fact, to this day, historians are very excited about what they can learn from the Freedom Suits, and there are at least 5 books that I know of that have been written by historians across the country on the Freedom Suits that were here in St. Louis. So if you have a chance to get downtown and look at the Freedom Suits Memorial, I suggest you do so. One little historical fact that I have to fix in the presentation, because if those of you who were here at the beginning of it, you heard the narrator say, and here in St. Louis, we taught the nation to cook. We also heard I'm from Tennessee. See, Memphis taught the nation to cook, all right? So let's get that little historical fact figured out here. But that's okay, though. We love the food here in St. Louis. Now, let's talk about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and why they came about. To understand why they came about, you have to go to the decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford, which is just simply called by many as the Dred Scott decision. That decision was the decision where the U.S. Supreme Court took upon itself, they didn't have to do this now, Justice Roger Taney took upon himself to use the issues in the underlying Dred Scott case, which really just simply had to do with the question of whether Dred Scott had significantly proven his freedom under Missouri law. Now the issue, they took that case to decide, or at least attempt to decide, all of the debates concerning slavery. Now this is the approach that the Supreme Court took in that decision. The approach that they took in that decision was to declare as a matter of Supreme Court jurisprudence and an interpretation of our Constitution, the relationship between the so-called Negro slave and white citizenry. And the relationship that they sought to declare as a matter of constitutional law was that black people in America, then called the Negro, the slave, was as a matter of divine ordainment and as a matter of the natural relegation of social relationships are to be and should forever be a subservient race to the white citizenry. The decision is kind of painful to read, but I recommend you read it. But Justice Roger Taney culminates in saying that there is no law, there is no right of the black man that the white man is bound to respect. Essentially saying that for all practical purposes, I see my brother is here in the audience, Judge Haney, but essentially saying that there is no law that really respects the existence of the black slave except those laws that govern property rights. You heard me, property rights. Now, the country at that time was in the middle of, you think we're divided now, okay? We were in the middle of serious, angry debate, discussions, arguments, political battles, a true fight in this country over slavery. The whole world was starting to divorce itself from slavery. The slave trade, international slave trade, had ended some 50 years before, and to put it quite, bluntly, America was looking bad. But there was a lot of money tied up in slavery. America had also, through the course of its years, become a very important developer of textiles for the world. The world discovered tobacco, and of course, America was the center of tobacco production. And of course, the world discovered how great it is to have sugar, and between slavery in the Caribbean and slavery in the southern parts of our country, sugar also became a major commodity coming out of the United States. Well, this was an awful lot of money to just let go. And quite frankly, as you no doubt suspect, the economic power centers of the Southeast were not going to let it go. And it became clear that wasn't going to happen. So you get to the Dred Scott decision, and Justice Taney, for whatever reason, I wasn't in the room, no matter how old I look, Justice Taney, for whatever reason, thought that he could write an opinion that would solve the slave issue. Let's just declare them as a matter of constitutional interpretation, that they are simply not citizens, can never be citizens, and should always be subservient to white people. In fact, he went so far as to basically say in that opinion that it would be a good thing for us black people, because he talked about, look how much we've done for them. We've taken them out of the savage life of Africa and brought them into the peace and freedom and light of the United States. Seriously, read the opinion, okay? The problem is that the Dred Scott decision, being a Supreme Court decision, was the final arbiter of constitutional interpretation. So if you want to undo a Supreme Court decision with respect to the interpretation and application of the U.S. Constitution, you have to have a constitutional amendment. Well, those who understood that knew that under no circumstances was a constitutional amendment going to be passed in the present climate of the United States. Obviously, the huge Southern bloc would vote no to anything ending slavery. So Dred Scott set the stage, and everyone knew that the only way Dred Scott could be fixed is by fixing the Constitution, but everyone knew that wasn't going to happen. And that's when everyone realized that something terrible was going to happen, including Abraham Lincoln. He saw it coming. He realized the nation could not survive half slave and half free. And in fact, when the Dred Scott decision came down, he wasn't president at the time. He read about it and proclaimed in a speech immediately thereafter, I went to bed, because he was in Illinois at the time, I went to bed with Illinois being a free state, and I woke up with it being a slave state. Why would he say that? Because of the position set out in Dred Scott that slavery was property and therefore protected by the right to property that cannot be taken by due process of law or without due process of law under the Constitution. Now, what did that set the stage for? That set the stage for anybody who owned slaves could not have their property simply taken from them by the state, even if that state was a free state. Thus, if somebody had a bunch of slaves that they wanted to bring into Illinois, New Jersey, New York, whatever free state existed in the United States, they could bring them because as a matter of constitutional law, their property rights were protected. That then, members of the jury, the trial lawyer in me just sprang out. You got to forgive that. That then, ladies and gentlemen, was the reason why there was a belief that there was going to be a civil war in the offing, because there was no way to fix it, and it appeared that the United States might become a slave nation, particularly the territories that were opening to the West, which was a big part of the equation at the time. So, Abraham Lincoln becomes president. He issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, a couple of things about the Emancipation Proclamation. We don't really know if it was legal or not. There doesn't really seem to be any basis for what was probably the most impactful executive order that a president ever wrote. But boy, did it irritate the pro-slavery section of the United States. So much so that the decision was made in the slave states, no, we can't, no more of this, no more of this. They then broke off and formed the Confederate States of America. Now, that obviously creates a huge problem because the United States is the United States. The federal government saw itself as governing all of the United States, and there was no sanctioning by Congress of any type of break-off of any state, any secession, but they seceded anyway. So what was going to be the next step in this? Then, of course, we have the attack on Fort Sumter, which was a fort that was in Confederate States territory, and because it was a United States fort, they wanted it out. America was going to move it. Lines were drawn in the sand. The fort was attacked, and the war began. Why go to war? Well, as I said, the Constitution was never going to be fixed because the southern states were clearly going to always vote against it. You just couldn't get enough states to amend the Constitution. So we have a war. Roughly 600,000 brutal, painful deaths later. Millions of families who lost husbands, sons, fathers, uncles to this bloody civil war, which tore our economy to pieces and left a nation that was clearly vulnerable to attack from the outside. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Because don't think Britain didn't think of it, but they waited until 1812 to act. Well, you better believe they thought about it. It's clearly written in Parliament, in some of the history of discussions in the British Parliament. They thought about taking it all back while we were weak, but they did not do that. By the time they got to 1812, which is another part of American history, we were prepared to fight that war, but that's another story, getting back to the present story. So after all those men are murdered in a bloody war, losses on both sides, then we have a nation, since the North won, the North controlled. So what happened immediately was the North made sure that all of the legislatures across the South were seated with anti-slavery delegates who would vote in their various legislatures for the constitutional amendments necessary to eliminate slavery, hence what became known as the Freedom Amendments or the anti-slavery amendments, starting out with the 13th. 13th is pretty straightforward. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have, except the punishment for the crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. One interesting and very powerful sentence that changed the nation when it was passed. But let's talk about, I want to give you a little tidbit to think about other history as I move on. The phrase, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. I'm not going to go off on that history, but if you study the United States of America, you know that that was a trigger for re-enslavement of black men, and in fact, it was an intentional re-enslavement. Black men were arrested and convicted under what was called the Black Codes for all kinds of crimes for the sole purpose of bringing them under the control of the southern states as convicted felons, and then they were farmed out. By the state, they were all farmed out to do what? Work as slaves, build roads. I mean, you've seen it, you've heard about chain gangs. I can go on and on and on. But that's where that comes from. Now, let's get back to the issue at hand. So the 13th Amendment ended slavery in the United States, but of course that wasn't going to be enough. We had to go to the 14th Amendment. Now, what the 14th Amendment did in sum, as related to the development of black history in the United States, is that it made us all citizens by fact of being born here. See, prior to that, there was not a clear national standard as to what citizenship meant. And all the various colonies and consequently the various states had control over citizenship. But remember in the Dred Scott decision, I told you said that black people could never be citizens? So how are you going to fix that? You have to have a constitutional amendment that does it. Easiest way, anybody born, and at the time they were really thinking of the fact that we, meaning black people, were a huge population of 5 or 6 million folks who had a history of having been born here at that time because the slave trade had ended a couple of generations before, so we were all born here, although traded in the international slave trade. In any event, in order to make all of us free, just simply anybody born in the United States is a citizen, and that's the genus or the beginning of how that came written into a constitution as it related to dealing with the issue of slavery in the United States. And of course, it made a lot of people instantly a part of the same citizenship family in this country with that particular amendment. But that wasn't enough. There was also an understanding that the various states felt that they could control property rights, voting, things of that nature, so we had to have the 15th Amendment, which basically established not only that black people had voting rights, but and I hate to say it at the time, but all men who were citizens had the right to vote. But, and we can get into why that took the 1920s to get let women on that train of voting, but that's another story. Again, I won't go into that history. That's not why I'm here. I'm paid for this one. So that then took care of not only voting, but property rights of black people. Now, I'll grant you, our history is full of all things that were done to take the property that black people had. It's been an ugly history in this country. And in all honesty, if you want to know why we are in such a state of economic disempowerment that we're in right now, it's because over the last 100 and some odd years, it was a slow erosion of the thing that really made the difference in economic power in this country, which is owning property. As you well know from your own understanding of general American history, the masses of people who came here from Europe came here because property was hard to get in Europe. They were owned by barons, lords, dukes, so on and so forth. And all of the land was basically caught up in the gentry, the royal gentry. So if you wanted some land of your own, then, you had to go someplace else. And then, of course, to hear about this wonderful land called the United States, needless to say, people flock here to get land, which is exactly what happened, which is why we ended up moving west and, all that to conflict with the Native Americans and so on. But it was all about land. Land was the basis of economic influence in this country then, and quite frankly, it remains so today. So anyway, getting back to those three amendments. Now, we have those three amendments, and you would think everything's okay, right? Everything's fine. Well, the nation quickly learned that it's very hard to write a constitutional amendment that covers every little nuance. We had a world after those amendments where you had a number of states who were doggedly determined to reinstitute as much of slavery as they possibly can. Looking at the wording of the Constitution, well, it doesn't say that people have the right to live wherever they want to live, so we're going to create regulations within our city, within our state, that says black people over here, white people over there. And it doesn't say anything about schools in these amendments. So heck, we're going to say white people have schools here, black people have schools over there. And there really isn't anything here about preventing us from having certain rules and regulations to assure that everybody who votes is a knowledgeable citizen and aware voter. So we're going to establish little rules and regulations for voting. We won't really enforce them on the white voters. We will force them strictly and harshly on the black voters. Poll tax, tests that you had to take. And sad part is the test taker who was at the poll would just simply ask harder and harder questions. Getting down to what kind of teeth did George Washington have? Nah, they weren't natural. Sorry, you don't get to vote. So, that's the kind of thing that was going on. And of course, as you know, that existed for a long time. It took a while to get rid of these rules and regulations that were designed to basically keep black people from voting. Why keep black people from voting? Because the anti-black populace learned during Reconstruction that if black people had to vote, guess what they're going to do? They're going to vote some black people into office. They're going to be, and then, good Lord, but there are millions of black people out the South. In fact, in some states, there were more black people than there were white because of the prevalence of slavery and the slave trade and the industries that rose from slavery. And so you had an awful lot of legislation, rules, attempts, the over-enforcement of criminal law against black people, on and on and on. So those three amendments, again, you would think were enough, but as we know, we had to have some statutory law to give direct life to those amendments that we passed in 64 and 68. And those laws created an enforcement mechanism for what is already in the Constitution. Because the Constitution didn't say, well, if somebody violates this, this is what you do. Now, granted, there was Section 83, 1984, I'm sorry, Section 84, 1983 of the Federal Code that would seem to allow it, but remember, that was only for violation of constitutional rights under color of state law. So you might have been able to use that law to sue government attempt to take away the rights of black people. However, getting into the courts and so on was increasingly difficult. And that never really did not have the impact that was necessary. So it was necessary for Congress to write some federal law with little teeth in it that could get people in the federal court and enable them to sue directly for their constitutional rights. And of course, Section 1983 litigation goes on even as we speak, particularly as it relates to prisoner rights. So that is, I don't know what my time is. Wrap it up? Okay, she's giving me this thing. So that is essentially how the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments came about, why they came about, and why they did not turn out to be enough for our country. So on the 13th and 14th Amendment, I would simply say, story to be continued. Thank you.
Judge Mason, thank you so much. You are certainly sharing with us a very thorough history lesson this morning. We appreciate your time during such a busy month.
Sit in this light. I'm sorry. Sorry who's ever filming me.
It all worked out.
Okay.
So now it is time for our second presenter, Twyla Lee. Twyla Lee holds a bachelor's degree from Harris Stowe State College, as well as master's degrees from University of Phoenix and Lindenwood University. Ms. Lee holds multiple teaching certifications and endorsements in the states of Missouri, Georgia, and Illinois. And Twyla spent 22 plus years as an educator, providing teaching and learning experiences to middle school scholars and teaching aspiring teachers at Harris Stowe State University College of Education. She now serves as an assistant principal in the Hazelwood School District, and throughout her career, she is focused on being accountable to students, parents, colleagues, and stakeholders to ensure that she provides the best educational experience and support to the youth entrusted to her. So Twyla is here with us today to talk about the celebrations of Juneteenth and why we do it here in St. Louis. Come on up, Twyla.
Good morning, good morning. As they told you, my name is Twyla Lee, and I'm also an educator. 22 years, next year will be my 23rd year as an educator. I also have a nonprofit organization called Bridge the Gap 314. So this is kind of my nonprofit and my daytime career merged together for my Juneteenth presentation. So during the COVID shutdown, when we were on remote learning, as everyone knows, the students really weren't logging in and we weren't just really learning. At that time, we had been in our homes for a couple months. The vaccinations were starting to come out, and I had the idea that came up to my mind. Let's have a Juneteenth festival. Unbeknown to me that President Joe Biden was going to announce that Juneteenth will become a federal holiday during the same year that I was planning the first Juneteenth celebration. And as the topic of my presentation is moving St. Louis into the modern Juneteenth era, it was because my position as a classroom teacher, as a history teacher, oftentimes my students would say, this was so old, I did not connect. Why is this important? It does not matter. And often we say that our students are not taking advantage of the opportunity. And I always tried to be that person that tried to make learning be interactive, fun, and the students could understand why. And my question to them would be why? Why is this important to change it so they can empower and uplift themselves? So that's how we get into the modern Juneteenth and my position. So in 2001 was the first presentation, and then the next year we started the Juneteenth parade down West Florissant from Ferguson to Dalewood. As we know, as St. Louisans, that's pretty much a historical spot for us because it is the site of the Mike Brown incident. And a lot of times annually, people go back to celebrate or even to remember Mike Brown's story. And with this year being a 10-year anniversary and also Juneteenth becoming more discussion, more mainstream, and included into events in June, it's just important that we continue that. So Juneteenth is an American holiday, just as the speaker before me went ahead and told us so carefully or whatever. And also a part of my reasons for celebrating Juneteenth and bringing it and doing it in the manner that I do is that I want to teach my students, the youth, their parents, that, there have been historical mishaps. There are reasons to why we are disenfranchised and not connected. But however, there are things that we can do to be connected and informed. So celebrating and learning in an environment that brings us together is part of the modern Juneteenth under my leadership and the way I see it. And also showing people there are multiple ways to celebrate and remember. All the time, it's not about just hearing the lectures or visiting a museum. Sometimes fun is important to teach. Oftentimes, that's how we grab students' attention. So the way that I approach teaching about Juneteenth is the same way that I approach teaching my students in the classroom, being an attention giver. So the location of the Dalewood Juneteenth Festival is an outside location with an outdoor roller rink. As we know, roller skating is kind of like a cornerstone of the African-American community and the different styles of skating. So bringing that there, some people may only show up under the impression that, hey, we're going to just skate. We're going to listen to good music. But however, the DJ is saying historical facts, teaching a story of Juneteenth. We have numerous community organizations that are telling the story, giving the advice and the help that we need. And also, we're laughing and we're just sharing. So, as I said earlier, that Juneteenth is an American holiday. Even the shirt that I have on today supports the misinformation that we have in America about Juneteenth, because my shirt is red, black, and green, when in fact the colors of Juneteenth is red, white, and blue, because it's an American holiday. So that just goes to show a widespread misconception and misunderstanding of Juneteenth and what it is. And that's also part of my mission of the modern Juneteenth, to where I correctly use the correct colors, flag, and because we're teaching the story, this is a historical event and it should be told accurately. So, also, we hear so much about diversity, equity, and inclusion and all of those things. And Juneteenth, even just using the colors of red, black, and green, goes to show of the misunderstanding and all those things or whatever. And I suggest that those misunderstandings become, because if you look in the high school curriculums and even so much we hear about African American studies, American history, American government, when Juneteenth, everything that happened to the enslaved people was American history. So I say oftentimes that our history is not being taught in harmony, it's being taught in isolation, as if the events and the happenings and the situations just didn't represent or influence events. And that's a lot of times why I see with my students, because we try to kind of teach things in isolation without saying, like, okay, this was going on at the same time. Like right now, I'm here speaking to you guys. Right now, someone's at home watching television. These two things are going on at the same time. And it doesn't have to be in isolation, and it does not have to be not in harmony. So those are a lot of things that I think if we start just really telling our story in harmony and go ahead, some of the stuff is not going to be nice, but some of it we have corrected it, and we're also teaching our youth in the future, hey, we got it wrong, but we have the opportunity to get it right. So that's a large part of my Juneteenth celebration, and the events that I bring is about bringing the history alive, helping everybody understand the power of being connected, knowledge, and all of that. And that our people that look like me, that were in bondage for 2.5 years longer because they were disconnected, because they were not informed, because they were not knowledgeable, because those in power understood the power of being informed and connected in knowledge. And we wanted to keep those in the power, those with money wanted to keep the money. And those of us that did not have it, we dreamed of it. And this year, their wildest dreams is the national thing for Juneteenth. And I do believe that this modern Juneteenth celebration that I have planning and so many others around the city is showing our ancestors we are their wildest dreams, and we can show the next generations that they are our wildest dreams. But we have to continue. It's not an easy thing. It's not a one time. And I see Juneteenth as an annual time that we can come together to assess, say, hey, this is where we are. This is what we need. This is what we said last year. This is how we can come more unified. This is how we can become more in harmony. So those are the things that when you come to the Bridge the Gap 314 website and our social platforms and all that, it's always about bridging the gaps to bring us together. Throughout this time, or even over the years, because this is my 4th year doing the modern Juneteenth celebration at the Delwood Rec Center, is that I have people that are not of the African American race. Well, I'm not African American. Is it still okay for me to participate? Can I represent? Can my organization? Yes, the answer is yes, because Juneteenth is an American holiday. It is for all of us, and the reason why people that look like me, my ancestors, were in bondage is because people were not coming and sharing the information, because we weren't connected. So yes, everyone is welcome, because that is how we move forward, working together and bridging gaps. So the reminder is that being knowledgeable is powerful, being connected is powerful. The mission of Bridge the Gap 314 and Juneteenth STL is for us all to be connected, informed, and empowered as possible. Juneteenth, like I said earlier, is an annual time where we can say, hey, what are we doing with our disenfranchised? How are we bringing them back in? How have we kept the promise of America together for all? Those born here, those that have immigrated, how are we being inclusive to everyone? So my call to action is for everyone to make Juneteenth a day on, not a day off. Read an article. There are numerous articles about Juneteenth, just a story. Visit the website of the African American History Museum. Come and see, artifacts, exhibits here at the Missouri Museum. Also, attend local Juneteenth events starting from June the 15th through the 19th, in person or live stream. There are numerous ways. Come volunteer, come be a friend, come be family with us, but just participate and start to learning, not just the story of Juneteenth, but the story of American history. Thank you for your time.
All right, Educator Twyla Lee, thank you so much for your work. Our next presenter.
Hello, I'm Twyla Lee, founder of Bridge the Gap
We get to play a
314
video.
and Juneteenth STL. Picture this, a sea of smiling people. Some are skating, dancing, shopping, receiving medical screening, giving blood, eating, celebrating, and remembering history while also looking forward to our future. Join us Wednesday, June the 19th at 12 o'clock at the Dalewood Recreation Center, 10266 West Florissant for the 4th annual Dalewood Juneteenth Festival presented by Bridge the Gap 314. Hello, I'm Twyla Lee, founder.
All right, there we go. That's the piece we were missing. Okay, our third presenter is about to step up, and I want to let you all know that all three presenters are going to join us on stage for a brief Q&A time. So if you're thinking of any questions for Judge Mason, for Twyla Lee, or Dr. James Tucker, keep them in mind. You'll have a chance right after this. Dr. James Tucker is a Christian, husband, father, activist, retired teacher, retired decorated combat veteran, activist, and the founder, owner, and publisher of the African American Voice online newspaper. His commitment to driving positive change is evident through his leadership as a co-founder and president of Africans Rising Together 2063. This organization is focused on fostering unity, empowerment, and advancement for African Americans, Africans in the diaspora, and Africans on the continent. For more than 3 decades, Dr. Tucker has been one of the driving forces in the Juneteenth movement. His dedication to this important historical event is evident in his ongoing role with the official National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. In 2005, he joined the board of directors, and he has continued to serve, contributing to the efforts that led to Juneteenth becoming the national holiday. All right, Dr. Tucker, come on up.
Thank you very much. I see Juneteenth as a time to bring families together. Why? Because Juneteenth divided, not Juneteenth, but slavery divided our families. So therefore, I'd like to introduce my family, my wife back there, beautiful Beverly Tucker, and my son, Andre Tucker. So hopefully we can use Juneteenth to bring families together and community together to make communities better and also the United States of America a better place. National Juneteenth Independence Day is a national holiday commemorating the end of slavery in the rebellious state. Its name is a combination of the word June and 19th, as it began on June 19, 1865. As I speak to you, I want you to keep in mind that the last slaves were not free on June 19, 1865. If you take a look at the states that continued slavery, such as Kentucky and Delaware, they continued slavery even after June 19, 1865. So it's important that you know that slavery did not end on June 19, 1865. Juneteenth originated in Galveston, Texas, and is now celebrated annually around the country. And it's also important for citizens to know that Texas did not support Juneteenth becoming a national holiday. What I mean by that, they wanted to keep Juneteenth in Texas for economic reasons. So as a result of that, it was Dr. Ron Myers who started the National Juneteenth Holiday Campaign. I was in the middle of a war zone, in the middle of a war, and I met a combat surgeon by the name of Dr. Frank McCune, who was a medical doctor. He worked in the Delta of Mississippi. And not only that, but he worked closely with Dr. Ron Myers Sr. And Dr. Ron Myers Sr., his story has not been told yet, but I'm just going to tell you briefly how he ended up in Mississippi. For you who know Fannie Lou Hamer, he was a medical student at the University of Wisconsin. And Fannie Lou Hamer, she basically told him that he would become a leader in the state of Mississippi. And as a result of that, he took his medical practice to Mississippi, where he provided medical service for people who, for the most part, who needed help, that could not afford medical services. Here is Dr. Myers. He's a founder of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, created in 1974. That is the organization that he founded. He lived in Mississippi. The first meeting was held in Louisiana. But he is responsible for Juneteenth becoming a national holiday. You will not hear his name that much because one of the things Dr. Fannie Lou Hamer told him, she said, out of all the things you do, all the things you do when you go to Mississippi, do not compromise. Do not compromise. And Dr. Myers, he was an activist, and he did all those things that Fannie Lou Hamer told him to do. And as a result, he was not recognized. I mean, he was an activist. He marched, he protested. He went all over the United States, all 50 states. He was connected with brothers and sisters all over the country who were interested in making Juneteenth a national holiday. And I got to know him, and of course we did a lot of things together as a result of serving on the board. We traveled to many different states together and held our national board meetings. But he is considered the father of Juneteenth because, as I said earlier, he was an activist. He was an activist. He fought for black doctors, more black doctors. He fought for the poor. He actually committed his life. I said again, committed his life. He was dedicated, committed, and he even died a poor man because he was an activist. He did not compromise with the status quo, and that is why I had so much respect for him. He also made many trips to Washington, D.C. He held flag-raising ceremonies at Howard University. He met with legislators. We had an annual prayer breakfast at the Press Club in Washington, D.C., and once again, it was mainly grassroots people who actually supported him, but that is the reason why Juneteenth is a national holiday today. As I said earlier, he organized annual at the Press Club. He invited grassroots conscious people to the Press Club, and we had programs to educate people about what's happening in the country and gave them information about how his plan to make Juneteenth a national holiday. As I stated earlier, he was an activist. And then once again, he promoted the recognition of Juneteenth as a state holiday or day of observance. The reason why we have Juneteenth on the third Saturday is because Dr. Ron Myers did not believe the United States government would make Juneteenth a paid holiday. I said again. And so when he advocated for it, he always went into the states. For an example, my exhibit, I lived in Colorado at the time. In 2005, Colorado legislators recognized Juneteenth as a national holiday. So he advocated for Juneteenth to be on the third Saturday. Now, how did it happen that the United States government decided to make it June 19th a holiday? It happened because, not of some of the people in Texas, but it happened because of the incident in Minnesota where the guy was killed. What's his name again? George Floyd. The government was desperate to do something to try to quiet things down in the United States of America. So as a result of that, that is one of the reasons why they, in my opinion, not opinion, almost true, made it a national holiday, and and they decided to make it a paid holiday. Dr. Myers has a website, and that website allowed state directors and anybody hosting a Juneteenth event to put their event online. And on that website, people could go to that website and they could actually find about all the Juneteenth taking place around the United States of America. Why is it not like that now? I'm going to share a very strong secret with you. And it's Dr. Myers, prior to him passing away, on his sick bed, he was dying, and an unknown person came in and stole all his personal and intellectual property. And as a result of that, our website went down, and we've been trying to rebuild ever since then. But you will hear more about that in the near future. I can't talk about it, but the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation is alive and well today, and you will be hearing about some legal action sometime soon. Dr. Myers, he was a musician, and he traveled around the country putting on concerts and promoting Juneteenth. And believe me, he was able to bring people together and educate people about Juneteenth, and June is also National Black Music Month and Jazz Month. As Dr. Miles' health began to fail, he reached out to all state directors. I was a state director in Colorado, and at that time, he asked us to support a woman by the name of Opal Lee, who was also a board member on our National Juneteenth Observance Foundation Board of Directors. And here you see pictures of us promoting her in Pueblo, Colorado. She would probably tell people that she marched in Denver and Colorado Springs. Well, that's not true. I'm a primary source. And I made sure that she got some news coverage when we did it. And her walk is symbolic. She did not walk from Texas to Washington, D.C. She walked 2.5 miles in the communities where she, where she were invited. And living in Colorado, living in Colorado, we were one of the first states to host her in Colorado to make her walk successful. And also, let me go back. Well, 1 minute here. All right, I'll go there. But if you take a look at that picture there, the lady by the name of Opal Lee, she is in that photo taking credit for the work that Dr. Ron Myers did. They did not recognize her. Dr. Myers dedicated and committed his entire life. He sacrificed his family and children to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And it's not on there, but there's a barcode where they basically mention that she was recognized. They did not. She and Abraham Lincoln was recognized, but they did not recognize Dr. Ron Myers Sr. when it became a national holiday. And it's important to note that Juneteenth would not be a national holiday today if it was not for whom? Dr. whom? Ron Myers Sr. And I want you to know the truth, because the truth is what matters. And we must not allow people to distort our history. Why? Because it's distorted too much. And as a result, if America is going to be a strong country, it's important to tell the truth and also let people know about the history of Juneteenth. There's the barcode there. I got ahead of myself, but please take a picture of that barcode. If you got a camera, I'll give you a few minutes to take a picture of that barcode, because that confirmed what I just told you, and it's a fact. Please read the article. You can also read an article in the newspaper that I started when I was in the war called African American Voice. You can go to my newspaper, AfricanAmericanVoice.net, or you can go to Black PR Wire and Google the article, How Juneteenth Became a National Holiday. And for many of you who don't know, Black PR Wire is like the Associated Press. They cover the news and also make sure that information is spread throughout the United States related to Black history. Dr. Myers' vision, once again, he dedicated his life to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And prior to Joe Biden making Juneteenth a national holiday, his vision was to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And his goal, his strategy was to get all 50 states to recognize Juneteenth as a state holiday or day of observance. And here you see he was successful in getting 47 states to recognize Juneteenth as a state holiday or as a day of observance prior to it becoming a holiday. The 3 states that did not recognize Juneteenth before it became a national holiday were North Dakota, South Dakota, and Hawaii. The Public Law 117.-17, it was a simple law that's, made Juneteenth a national holiday. And Dr. Myers did not ever think it would become a national holiday. He didn't ever think it'd become a national holiday. He always advocated for it to be a national holiday on the 3rd Saturday. That's my point. So what did this law do? It did very, very little for African Americans. Why? Because it basically said Juneteenth is a national holiday. So what is the goal of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation now that was founded by Dr. Ron Myers? One of our goals is to start working towards reparation. And that is, we feel like the slaves should be what? Paid for descendants of slaves should be paid for the work our ancestors did. I think that's a good way to say it. What do you think? Is that a good way to say it? All right, but I just wanted to say that. Mississippi Stranglehold, the 13th Amendment to the, let me say this before I talk about this. As all the speakers mentioned, Juneteenth is an American holiday, but it's important to understand that today we must focus on the Juneteenth amendments, and that is the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments today. We must focus on the amendment because those are the amendments that is going to actually make the United States of America a better country. The 13th Amendment was about, was passed in December 6, 1865, but Mississippi was one of the states that didn't recognize Juneteenth or officially abolish slavery or recognize the 13th Amendment until 2013. Why? Because they were still angry and upset because at the end of slavery, Mississippi demanded that they be paid for their slaves, the slaves, once they were freed. And so it didn't happen in the state of Mississippi until 2013. Just a little bit about ART 2063, African Rising Together. Our motto is, this is a nonprofit organization mission to educate people of African descent concerning the historical significance of our experience, culture, and contribution to the world. And our motto is, we as African Americans must tell our untold story. For too long, we've allowed others to tell our story, and it's important that we tell our story. And if you take a look at the exhibit I have many artifacts out in the, what do you call it? Atrium. You would see probably about a third of all the things I've accumulated from 1991 to present. And it's the history of how Juneteenth became a holiday and documents related to my involvement and also working with Dr. Ron Myers Sr. You can go to our website, and I'll just take a few minutes. Our event will take place on June 15th in Forest Park. And I encourage you to come out because Juneteenth is a time we educate people. Our VFW, Veteran Forum War, will be leading our walk on Saturday morning. Our registration starts at 7 o'clock. And also we're inclusive of all people. One of my good, I say white friends, like they say black friends, one of my white friends from Colorado, she'll be flying out on Friday afternoon, and she's going to address the issue of disabilities and tied in with our movement to be free in this country. And her name is Julie Riskin. She's president of the, you can scan it up there. She's also president of the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, one of the strongest organizations in the country. And most importantly, she's handicapped, she's in a wheelchair, but she is a real freedom fighter. And I encourage you to come out and listen to her speak about 10:30 on Saturday. I'd like to thank you for listening to the untold story about how Juneteenth became a national holiday. Remember this, there's only one side of the truth, and I back my truth up with facts, and I can prove everything I said. Thank you very much.